Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. We're about 8 minutes before top of the hour 9. You're still listening to News and Views right here on Salam Media, where we don't just skim the headlines, we dig deep into the conversations that matter. Now, imagine this. Uh, More journalists have been killed in Gaza since October 7th than in any modern conflict. Any. You can think of any more than both world wars, which is staggering and mind blowing, more than in Vietnam and more than in Afghanistan combined, all of them. And sometimes I think we forget that that's not just collateral damage. What's happening now to the journalists in Gaza? It's not they're not just caught in the crossfire as you'd imagine it. It's a targeted strategy on the truth, a war on truth itself, and on the journalists that are documenting this genocide. Today, I'm joined by South African journalist Atiyyah Khan, whose latest piece, A Movement Against Silencing, cuts straight to the heart of this issue. From Gaza's frontline storytellers to murals in Salt River and visuals across South Africa, it was a really great read about journalism being under fire, quite literally, and ultimately what it means to speak truth in an age of suppression. And Atiyyah is joining us via our virtual platform. Atiyyah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, really excited to be chatting to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
Pleasure's all ours. Atia, your piece, that you wrote, is both personal and very very political. What was the turning point for you? The moment that you knew this war on journalists in Gaza needed to be documented and needed to be documented with urgency. Most importantly.
I think the turning point was really at the beginning, 2 weeks into the genocide. Um, I was asked to speak at a protest in Salt River, and at that point, already 17 journalists had been killed. So um, it was unimaginable to me that at 2 weeks into what we didn't know was going to become a genocide. Um, at that point, we didn't know what was happening. I don't think anybody knew what to call it. It only got called genocide much later. But at that time, already to see how many journalists they had killed was really shocking. And also, the fact that we know the killing of journalists and health workers is a crime under international law. So it was a blatant ignoring of international law. And most often when journalists are in war zones like in Rwanda, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, under apartheid South Africa, they are protected.
Mm,
So, things might be happening around them, but directly attacking them. And what's been happening in Israel is also the targeting of not only the journalists, but their families also. So they get a warning to say that if you don't evacuate, if you don't stop reporting, if you don't leave your houses, you're going to be killed. And that's exactly what's been happening, as we can see, as we've been seeing repeatedly until now over the last 600 days.
mm, mm, mm. I think very, very important that you note that. One thing that really caught my eye while reading your piece is how you describe Palestinian journalists as redefining journalism and what we know and understand this medium or this profession to be. They don't have salaries for the most part. There's no protection of any kind, but yet there's this relentless reporting that they're always, presenting to the world. What lessons do they teach us? Not just about courage, but about the core purpose of journalism and what it should be in its true and most natural sense.
Yeah, I mean, I commented on this from the start that there's this divide between what journalists in Palestine are showing us and what the West is showing us. On the one hand, we are seeing something in the West that makes me completely ashamed to call myself a journalist. Fake news, the badgering of interviewers,
Mm,
just completely massive bias. Whereas the journalists in Palestine, they don't even have access to electricity. All their media houses were bombed in the first two weeks of the genocide. Um, Most of them are not even fully qualified. They just decided to wear the press vests and then go out when they saw their colleagues being killed or when they saw their family members being killed. And no matter how many are being attacked and the kinds they're living without their homes, they've had to evacuate, their family members have been killed. They don't have things like simple access to charging ports, like if you have a camera for a battery for your camera or for your phone, external hard drives. Like we have to think about technically how does that work. And also, for me, they've become my heroes because I don't know anybody in the world who has a choice to leave with their families, who has a choice to choose survival, and they actually understand that any day they could be taken out, they could be killed. And that's what they're doing. And it's
Mm.
unbelievable. I've never actually seen anything like it, but everybody has been like that. Of course, some of the best ones have had to evacuate um, for different reasons, and you can't hold that against anybody. But the fact that they are still coming up, I mean, every day you see new journalists. I'm continuously shocked because
Mm.
also foreign media were not allowed to enter Gaza. So the reporting on the ground is the most important reporting, is the most accurate reporting. But one thing to note, and I've noted this in the article, that nobody, because I've done my research, nobody can tell us now how many journalists have been killed.
True.
And you've got the CPJ, the Committee of Protection of Journalists, which has already been very low for the longest time. Al Jazeera does, the Ministry of the Gaza Ministry of Health. But then if you hear a number and you hear news the whole day that journalists have been killed and that number doesn't change, you have to start wondering, like, who's keeping track? Does anybody even have capacity when they basically being eliminated? Who has
Mm.
capacity? There's no offices for somebody to be sitting in Gaza for them to be monitoring what's happening to journalists. It's just happening. And it's also shown that um, Israel will act uh, with impunity against anybody. There's really no stopping them.
Mm. 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 You mentioned the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, and coincidentally, I was actually with my colleague at the UJ Business School for her annual lecture that they host there at the UJ Business School. What impact did her death have on you personally, and on your view of the risks that journalists face? I mean, I was just listening to that lecture, and when her death was documented, and I think it was her nephew that was speaking, it it feels like it was a turning point at that moment where the whole world could see that there's now a deliberate attack on journalists. There's a deliberate attack on the eyes and ears that are on Gaza at that moment. And it was before October the 7th. It was, a long way before October the 7th. But at that point, you can almost feel that something's amiss here. Journalists have never been targeted in that manner.
Yeah, exactly. Like at the time when she was attacked by a sniper, it was captured on film because I think she was reporting at the time. And then what happens is the same thing that happens with Israel every time. An attack happens that they carry out. They flat out deny it. Um, the news spreads. They blame somebody else. By the time the news is verified, by the time they retract the statement, by the time they apologize, no one is paying attention. So the
Mm.
IDF was responsible. That was a blatant IDF attack. We know that. It has been proven. They've taken accountability for it. But what I think was the turning point, and that's why I always tell people about these other moments before October 7th, is that showed, I even noted this in the piece, that moment showed that they can do this, that they will do this, that it doesn't matter if you're a top correspondent or some lowly, unqualified person at the bottom. They will do what they want to do and they can do it. and they have done it, and they'll do it
Mm.
with precision and skill. And that was the first time I've ever witnessed anything like that in my whole life. Okay,
True.
she was a top journalist, and it was captured. And then worse is there was also chaos at her funeral. I'm not sure if you remember that.
Yeah.
There was like a disturbance. Her funeral was highly surveilled, and even the coffin had like, people were rushing to disturb the coffin. So even in death, there wasn't peace for her, and her family has been working very hard to advocate for her cause. But it's very important for us to understand that Shireen Abu Akleh's death was the start for me, in all of this. Over the years, you may have heard of one or two, but not
Mm.
back to back like this, and not
True.
so proud, and not so. They just completely. There's been no apology. There's been no acknowledgement. All they will say is that that journalist was working with Hamas. That journalist was, even the tent that they bombed at the hospital, where we saw the video of, I think it was Ahmed Mansour. Um, he was, caught burning. He was burning alive, and then he died the next day. Even then, they didn't say. They said that those journalists were busy working with Hamas. They didn't apologize. They haven't taken any accountability for it. So, unfortunately, my article also notes that it's going to keep happening. You
Mm.
know, that
Mm.
this figure, this reporting, this number of days of genocide, this number of journalists killed is just a number. And I wouldn't have known that when I said 17 at that speech, or when we said 120 at the vigil we had last year for journalists. But that's unfortunately like where we at, and it's devastating. It's really devastating to think about that.
Mm. 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 I want to touch, I think, on a point that you touched on a bit. Western media and its reporting on what's happening in Gaza. I mean, from the 40 beheaded babies lie, to CNN's critical reporting, and just the poor journalism that is on display. And maybe draw parallels to here at home, South Africa, and how we went about reporting on Palestine and on Gaza, and how on one side you have Western media having all the resources, and over reporting lies, and here in South Africa, where it almost feels underreported. Granted, there's less resources, but it seems there's no urgency when it comes to how we report on Palestine here in South Africa, and you'd expect more, considering the solidarity that we have displayed.
No, absolutely. I mean, it brings us back. I had an interview last night actually where the host was asking me, how does media work? How does journalism work? Who is above a journalist? What's the role of an editor? What's
Hmm.
the role of the owner? And I've never been actually asked that. I was quite surprised that he took that angle, but you have to think about who owns the media. I was very surprised that South Africa, because I don't work in the newsroom, I work at home. I'm a freelancer, so I have the freedom to go to do these kinds of interviews. I have the freedom to condemn Israel publicly and call them a disgraceful nation. But many other journalists, even in South Africa, can't do that because they have to answer to an editor, and the editor has to answer to the owner, and the owner has to answer to the person who's giving the funds, and then we have to think about who's giving the funds. And so we have to trace the money. And I don't think anybody has done that work of tracing why are South African publications so quiet. We are seeing every single day. It was very shocking because I didn't think of any South African news sources to go to. Of course, there's the alternative media, there's Salam Media, there's a lot of other publications online, um, on websites. But in terms of the mainstream in South Africa, it was
Mm.
very slow. It was very minimal in taking a stance. Like in terms of the language being used, I felt like it still copied a lot of what the West was doing. In terms of actually taking a stance, it took a really long time for anybody to use the word genocide. It's really weird how nobody wants to call this thing a genocide. America still hasn't called it that. Most American newspapers don't call it that. They just call it the attacks or the killings. And it's when we organized the vigil in Cape Town, or well, in the whole country for journalists last year, many colleagues had expressed their fear of losing their jobs. So
Mm,
I realized then, and I may have been at first like, come on, you can't be serious. But actually, I realized, these people have families also. They want to do the right thing, but they also have to worry about their jobs and their safety at their jobs. And it just shocked me because of apartheid in our common history, there should be no question. There is no question that what is happening there is a form of apartheid, and even worse. A lot of anti apartheid era journalists have said it's even worse than what we went through.
mm,
So, how then are we still censoring ourselves? How then are we still censoring what we write? And over the last 600 days, I've spoken publicly, I've done interviews, I've done radio shows, all kinds of things, the virtual speeches, but I haven't written a piece. And so this piece was a long time coming. It had to say, from an international journalist perspective, what what the experience was. It had to say that. But I can tell you now that the West has done a massive disservice on the world. They've spread false narratives. They have dehumanized Palestinians. They've spread a lot of Islamophobia, a lot of fake news in things like the New York Times, which I basically stopped reading. Um, Publications that we aspire to work for and write to.
mm,
I before the genocide, I was going to start pitching articles to the New York Times, and then when they started covering everything, I was so shocked. I couldn't believe it. Even though there's some very good writers and freelancers, I couldn't believe the level of bias. But then at the same time, who's funding the New York Times? Who's funding these publications? Who's funding the CNN? And we've seen mass levels of journalists from the BBC and the CNN step down or get fired or resign because they had to report with a bias. They've spoken now after resigning, saying that I left because I had to report with a bias. So they are actually admitting that they had to change the language. They had to change what they were saying. They had to eliminate certain things. And I think in South Africa, there is this traditional old school method of journalism that journalism has to be objective.
mm.
Um, yes, that's what we aim for. We aim for
That's
objectivity.
that's what you get taught.
That's what we get taught, and that's what
Yeah.
we aim for. But
Mm,
I don't think if this was Nazi Germany, anybody would be talking about objectivity. I really don't.
mm,
You
mm,
know, I don't think if this was the Holocaust, anybody's going to be like, "Oh no, let's report accurately on the gas chambers. What is it really?" I don't think that would be happening. Probably in some propaganda machines, but I think it's very unfair that we have to stop acting like human beings just because we're journalists and be like, "Oh no, the conflict in the Middle East." Like already that is very problematic for me. Yes, it's a
mhm,
conflict, but it's only a conflict if two sides are attacking each other, and this is not what's happening. So it also shows a lack of history. It shows a lack of education on behalf of journalists, and it shows that there's a lot of work for the rest of us to do. The difference is we're working independently. We're working on independent platforms. We are not in the mainstream. For anyone to take notice of what we're doing, we're going to face a lot of backlash. You have to be very thick skinned to go against Zionists in South Africa, who are also connected with a lot of white supremacy, who are also connected to the story of the white genocide. Like we have to make those threads
mm,
about um, who's actually benefiting, why are they so brainwashed, why are they refusing to see the truth no matter what we show, and also stick to what we believe in, because we can't be objective in the situation. It's
mm.
impossible. We've seen the facts over and over again.
Mm, mm. And I think, I'll ask this question because, it has been thrown at me and my colleagues here at Salam Media a lot of times when people say, be journalists, don't be activists. There's a difference between the two. And over and over again, you try to explain that actually journalism is a form of activism. How would you respond to that? How would you respond to be a journalist, don't be an activist? Two sides of the story nonsense that we're always getting. I know you touched it on it a bit, but uh, how do you just make people understand that there's no, you can't be objective when the truth is there to bear for all to see?
Yeah, I think that you know the state of media has changed. You know, I can tell you now, it's nearly impossible to get a job in a newsroom with 100 journalists around you, all reporting, with a functional media space. South Africa doesn't have a functional media space. Everything is changing in the world due to digital media, due to fake news, due to social media. So the truth and maintaining the truth is more at risk now than ever before. Sticking to the truth and telling the truth is one thing, okay? So as journalists, we commit to the truth. That is the bottom line. We tell the stories, and we tell the stories from every angle. We report the facts of what both sides are doing. That's what we do. That is that is reporting accurately. But at the same time, I have been called an activist because of showing up for Palestine or for other things like land rights and housing. Um, and it's something that people call me. It's something that I do naturally, which is basically work against fighting injustice. And even in the journalism that I do, it's because to amplify voices against any kind of injustice, whether that's writing about jazz or whether that's writing about a land issue. But essentially, I don't think that we can stand back and watch this stuff happening. Of course, activism is a personal choice, but some of the best journalists in South Africa's history, all of
Mm,
the anti-apartheid journalists, all of them, Zubaida Jaffa, Jimmy Matthews, Omar Bacha, Rashid Lombard, if you look at the photojournalists and the journalists, they were also personally affected by what was happening. So of course they were naturally activists.
mm,
Like what's happening in Palestine affects all of us. We just have to figure out the threads of how it affects us. It affects global politics. It affects who goes where, who operates where, which countries are friends with each other, who's going to be doing business with each other. It affects everything, and we just have to see through that lens. So for me, if you're not going to see journalism as an extension of, or activism and as an extension of their journalistic work, then I don't know what space you're operating in, and that's your personal choice, and that's okay. Not everybody has to be an activist. Not everybody has to be super passionate about something. You can still maintain a distance. You can still keep the emotions behind, but I think it is just standing up for injustice, which is really part of our history.
mm.
It's where we come from. It's how we were raised here.
Mm, definitely. Now, on your piece, you touched on something that we're fighting on almost a daily basis here in our organization, Salam Media. Algorithmic censorship. You touched on shadow banning and the suppression of Palestinian voices online. And I can tell you for free, it's happening to us each and every day. We try and find new strategies. Whether it's wording or just to work around it. Um, are tech platforms the new censors, and what can journalists do to ultimately fight back? Is there a way around it?
It's a great question because I mentioned to someone yesterday that the shadow banning on Instagram and social media actually started in 2021 when Israel was bombing Sheikh Jarrah. That's the first time I saw it for myself personally, because basically what's happening now on Instagram and social media and Facebook was happening in 2021. It's just that less people were paying attention at the time, but there was an amount of people still locked in. So suddenly we started learning about this term called shadow banning. So when 2023 comes around, I was already prepared. All my social media accounts were actually already following these citizen journalists on the ground. But all of them were speaking out, guys, like, from their end. Um, I've been told that my posts have been taken down. I've been told that I violated community standards. Meanwhile, all kinds of other stuff gets through and gets allowed to be shown. But if you, like, all of us learn very quickly, we need to start censoring the words we're doing, not censoring, but
Mm,
changing the words that we say, using different language. And social media activists or activists online have found ways to move past that. The problem is, and something that nobody realizes, or I feel that South Africans are still very ignorant about, because there are other platforms. There are platforms like Telegram and Signal, but Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Meta like runs all of these platforms, and they're all highly surveilled. You shouldn't be surprised if you are stopped at a border when you're traveling
mm,
because of what you've been saying on your WhatsApp. You know what I mean? We say and we reveal everything all the time, and we don't realize that people could hack in at any time, and this can be used against us when in a public space. We see that's what's happening. So I don't know how we push back against it, and I think we just have to be strong as an international media community in terms of independent, in terms of our own websites, blogs, radio, online radio, platforms like Salam Media. We have to keep pushing. And I've also commented through this whole genocide. I've said it multiple times that the best media doing the work in this country often is the Muslim or Islamic media.
mm,
And it's such a pity because with the rising Islamophobia, a lot of people won't pay attention just because it has the word Muslim or Islam attached to it, which is really sad because some of the most accurate reporting is actually coming from the side. And some of the most urgent, important reporting. But there's a division. There's a division. And so, how do we fight against it? We find every way we can. We continue doing it. We don't stop. I know a lot of people have been deterred by the shadow banning, by the algorithm. It affects all of us, right? But I think we just have to like keep being insistent because they are hoping that it'll make us stop, and it hasn't made us stop.
mm,
So I just like my advice for anybody in this situation has been um, make sure you read multiple news sources before you build an opinion about anything. Make sure you fact check yourself because you can do that. And make sure you actually engage with what's happening. And I think the problem with what's been happening is that there's a lot of people, younger and older, probably mostly older, that aren't on social media platforms. So they
mm,
just maybe have CNN. I mean, if you have to think about like the global media space, what Americans are consuming, some of them, especially the older ones, are just watching TV or they're watching, news or whatever. So they have to just take whatever they hear. And this is why I'm saying that the Western media has failed people and they failed the Palestinians because they have created their own narrative about what they wanted to create. And we have to also ask who owns the media and why were they creating that narrative. And there've been like movies made about this. So it's not news, it's just about realizing there's something wrong and we can't trust the media in that space anymore.
mm, mm. Just your final reflection on this. I'm about to let you go in a bit. You end your piece with a promise. You say we will not be silenced. What gives you hope right now when journalism seems to be both under siege but yet more essential than ever?
No, exactly. I said the same thing yesterday. I said that journalism in South Africa is dying only because it's very hard for me to get paid as a writer to in this country, and there aren't any jobs. I work in the cultural arts
True.
journalism space. There aren't really any jobs. I've been applying and applying, and so I'm like, journalism is dead. But at the same time, with the rise of AI, fake news, and media conglomerates uh, controlling the narrative, There has never been more of a need for journalists than there is now. So what you're saying is actually exactly what I've been thinking and what I wanted to say also, which is that um, while we have this complete annihilation of this field, while it's kind of lessened, while we see a completely unethical approach to this world in some ways, in some parts of the world, I think in South Africa we still have some really good reporters and reporting, but for the most part, people are not trusting traditional news forms. People would rather trust some random fake video made on the internet than they would trust us. So there's an issue there. So there's more need than ever for traditional journalistic values. And by values, I mean things like fact checking, things like, checking reports against each other. There's more need than ever to commit to the truth and to find the truth and to stick to that and to be loud about it. And so for me, journalism, it's not like a desk job for me. I'm a freelancer, so I'm working all the time. I'm working day, night, weekend. I'm always present in this mode because I'm always taking things in. It's not something that starts. I don't clock in and clock out. This is actually like the life that I live. And this will always be my life, whether I choose another field or not. Because we're being forced, as younger journalists, we're being forced to change careers and change gears. But at the same time, we're always taking in things, and it's our responsibility to do as much as we can, to be as loud as we can. And that was my point. It's about like we have to amplify on behalf of these journalists who are dying, who are risking their lives, because I don't think we are brave enough to do something like that. So we have to amplify for them as much as we can, wherever we are, whether we're sitting with family, whether we in public spaces, or whether we on our own platforms. We have to amplify and we have to be very loud about what's happening.
No, definitely. I think we're going to leave it on that note. Atiyyah, thank you so much for joining us. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and hope we chat soon in the not so distant future.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
There you go. That was Atiyyah Khan, journalist, writer, and one of the voices refusing to let Gaza be forgotten. I think, if you can just encapsulate this interview, her message is clear. Journalism is not just about reporting events, it's about refusing to look away. So if you have the time, please check out her article. It's on the MRN website. She published it on May the 28th, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, please check it out. It's titled "The Movement Against Silencing: What Palestine Has Taught Us About Journalism." It's a really, really great read. Please take a look at it. And yeah, it's conversations like this, that motivate me, to know that you still have young journalists that are out there that, despite how incredibly difficult the space is, but they are committed to the cause, not just the cause of people of Palestine, but the cause of truth and justice. Because as we mentioned, journalism is a form of activism. We're going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.